Hi everyone, welcome to another episode in the How to Become a WordPress Developer series, where I go over the skills required to become a WordPress developer. In this video, we're going to cover hooks. I'll explain what they are, we'll go over the two types of hooks available in the WordPress ecosystem, and I'll show you a few tips and tricks on how to master them. Stay till the end, my name is Anton, and let's learn something new. When I first started my WordPress development journey, I didn't fully understand all the benefits of hooks, and it took me a while to grasp the full potential of what they were capable of. In my opinion, hooks are one of the most underestimated and underappreciated features in the WordPress ecosystem. So what are hooks? Hooks are a way for code to modify or interact with code at specific predefined spots. There are two types of hooks available, actions and filters. Both are very similar in structure. However, actions do not return any data, but filters must return the same data type being sent in. To execute an action or perform filtering, we use doAction or applyFilter functions. These will act as hooks inside the code, which we can later access with our callback functions using the unique hook name string. Both actions and filters can send optional arguments back to the callback function. In addition, filters will provide the data being filtered. Keep in mind that the data type being sent into the filter should be the same data type being returned from the filter. Meaning if a value is a string, then the callback function should return a string as well. But I'll talk a bit more on this later on in the video. To register a callback on our code, we'd use addFunction or addFilter functions. Again, they're very similar in structure, both have 4 parameters, 2 of which are optional. Hook name is the unique string ID of the action or filter we're trying to hook into. Callback is the name of our callback function. Priority is a way to specify the order in which functions associated with a specific hook are executed. Functions with a lower priority will be executed first, functions with a higher priority will be executed second, and if 2 functions have the same priority, they will be executed in the order they were added. For example, a function with a priority of 9 is going to be executed before the function with a priority of 10. A function with a priority of 11 will be executed after a function with a priority of 10. Let's look at a few examples. Here we have 4 callback functions. The first function to execute is going to be callback run me early because it has a priority of 9. The next function to execute is going to be callback run me normal. Even though it doesn't have a priority set, we all remember the default priority is 10, so it's going to go after 9. Then we have 2 functions with the same priority. The first one is going to be callback run me late because it was added first inside our code. The second one, callback run me later. Hopefully the concept is easy to understand. The majority of your code is going to run perfectly fine with the default priority of 10. And lastly, the accepted arguments specify how many arguments are sent back to the callback function. Let's look at a few examples of actions. The first example we're going to look at is how to add a new menu point inside the WordPress dashboard. To add extra submenus and menu options to the admin panel's menu, we will need to use the admin menu action. It runs after the basic admin panel menu structure is in place and allows us to add our menu items. We're going to use the addAction function and specify that we're hooking into the admin menu action. Our callback function name is addMenuPages. Let's create the function itself. Inside the function, we're going to use the WordPress function addMenuPages to register a new admin page. It accepts 4 arguments: the page title, the menu title, the capability of the user accessing the menu, and the menu slug. Pro tip: unless you're using namespaces or classes, be mindful of function names because 2 functions with the same name will conflict with each other. There are 2 ways to try and avoid conflicts. The first one is to prefix your function with a unique string, for example your plugin slug. This significantly reduces the chance of conflict, however it does not guarantee that there won't be any. The second option is to use the function exists check and see if the function with the same name already exists. If the function doesn't exist, let's use our function. This will guarantee that there are no conflicts. But personally, I do recommend using classes or namespaces. Let's get back to our example. We're using the admin menu hook to register a new menu item on WordPress. As you can see, nothing is being returned. We are just performing a certain action. If we were to look at the original call, we can see that WordPress uses a doAction function to trigger the callback of all registered actions with a specified hook name, in our case, admin menu. At this point, all the callback functions registered for this hook will be executed. In this example, the doAction call has no arguments. If no data is required inside the callback function, you don't need to provide any arguments. For some reason, WordPress passed in an empty string as an argument, but if we were to change it to something like this, both calls would be exactly the same. Let's look at another example, this time with arguments. We're going to try to hook into the WordPress update function that is triggered when a post or a page is updated. The action that we're looking for is called edit post. Let's find it in the WordPress files. As we can see, the action has two additional parameters, post ID and the post object itself. This is really helpful when we need to know what was just updated, and it will allow us to use these values in our callback function. It's time to register our callback. Again, we're going to use the add action function and provide the ID of the hook we're trying to link into. Edit post, provide the function name of our callback, and create the callback itself. When the edit post action is triggered, it will send two arguments. If we only need the first one, we could simply add it to the function and it will work, because the accepted arguments count is 1. Let's add it to our function. By the way, you don't need to use the same parameter names as in the original call. Instead of post ID, you could use ID or whatever you want, and it won't really make a difference. If we want to perform an action when a post with a specific ID is updated, let's say we want to send an email with the new post title to the admin when a post with an ID of 1 is updated, we do something like this. Because we're only looking for a post with an ID of 1, we can return if the post ID does not match 1. When you do any data comparison in PHP, it is highly recommended to use strict comparison because it will make you more aware of the data type that you're working with. Also, it's recommended by the WordPress coding standards. Pro tip. Another great tip that will make your code really stand out in terms of quality is unwrapping your conditional statements. Let's look at this example. We have this isValidUser function that checks if the name is John, and it also checks for the unique user ID. If you look at this, there's quite a lot going on. The function accepts a string for the first argument, an integer for the second argument, and returns a Boolean value. I often see code like this, and it can have multiple layers of conditional checks. Whenever the function becomes larger, it's really hard to track what's happening. A good approach is to unwrap these conditional checks and exit as early as possible. So, for example, we know that if the name is not John, the function will always return false. Let's move out this conditional check to the top of the function and exit early. Because we're doing a return here, the code will not go any further, so removing the else statement will make the code cleaner and easier to understand. Our function would then look something like this. Similar with the ID check, we return true for users that have an ID that equals 20. We've already checked for the correct name, now we just need to verify the ID. We could simplify it even further by combining our ID check with the name check. Or even do something like this. So be mindful of your code and always try to reduce the number of levels inside your conditional checks. Let's get back to our code. We've checked for the post ID, and we do not need to perform any action if the user made changes to a post with an ID of 1. Let's say we want to email the site administrator the name of the updated post. By the way, have you noticed any errors in my code? If we leave it like this, we won't be able to access the post parameter because now the add action function defaults to having only one parameter. Remember the priority and argument options? Let's adjust the add action function to accept 2 arguments. We leave the priority at 10 and we set the number of arguments to 2. Now we can access post inside our function. The only thing left to do is take the post title and email it. We're going to use the WordPress WP mail function, provide an email address, the email subject, and send the post title inside the body. Let's see if it works. Filters are almost identical to actions, but instead of executing code and acting on something, they will allow us to filter data and send back the results to the original hook. Here's another example. Let's say we want to change the post title and display it back to the user. For this, we need to find a filter that modifies the title and add our callback function to this filter. In this case, the filter we're going to use is the title filter. Let's register our callback. We use the add filter function and provide the filter ID and the name of our function. Now that we've registered our callback, let's create the callback function. Our callback function is going to use the title as the function parameter. Always make sure that the data type returned by the callback function matches the input data type. An easy way to remember that is whenever you create a callback function, before you even add any code, just return the first argument. This way, even if you don't add any additional code, nothing will ever break. Similar to actions, filters also provide additional arguments to your callback function. If you look at our example, the apply filters function sends two arguments to our callback function, title and ID. If we only wanted to adjust the title for a specific post, we could always utilize that second parameter. Set the default priority, specify that our callback will receive two arguments, and adjust our function. Now, if we only wanted to change the title for post with an ID of 1, we'd do something like this. Again, very important, do not forget to return the value being filtered. If you look at the WordPress source code, we will see that any action or any data that you see on the dashboard or on the front end will have a filter or an action associated with it. So if you want to extend something inside WordPress, most likely there's already a hook for that. When you're developing a plugin or a theme, always think how other people will interact with your product. One of the worst things you can do as a developer is not provide means for other developers or users to extend your code. As a general rule of thumb, any data that is being displayed to the user or is being processed, like saved to the database, should pass through a filter. Any major action performed by your plugin or theme should have an action hook associated with it. Sometimes you will want to remove a filter or an action that's registered inside WordPress core or even in other plugins or themes. To remove a callback function from an action or a filter, you need to use the remove action or remove filter functions. Let's look at an example. Let's say we wanted to remove emoji scripts from our site. If we look at the default WordPress action, we can see that the WP head action has a print emoji detection script, which loads up emoji scripts in the header of every page. To remove this action, we need to hook into a place that is after where it was registered. And in this example, you can see that the next action is init action. So we can hook into that action and try to remove the registered callback functions. The parameters passed to remove action and remove filter must be identical to the parameters passed to add action or add filter that registered it, or the removal won't work. In this case, we use the remove action function, we specify the hook ID, the callback function, and the priority that was used. That's it for this video. We've looked at hooks, we've covered some basic concepts, we looked at a few advanced examples. If this video helped you out, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. My name is Anton. See you in the next video.